For coming out tonight. I'm Shantay Robinson, the Education Programs Manager in the Education and Community Engagement Department at Montgomery Community Media. Okay, so I'm so thrilled to present to you my fellow alums from Syracuse University, Nicki Mayo. She's a multimedia journalist. I'm going to read her lengthy bio, the whole thing, because there's so much information in it.
And don't do that to them.
No, because as I'm reading it, think of your questions at the end. So this is how it's going to go. I'm going to read the bio. We're going to watch her reel of work. I'm going to ask some questions, and then we're going to open it up to the community so that you can ask questions if you like. Okay. So Nicki Mayo is the multimedia journalist behind Nicki Mayo News, LLC, an audio video company specializing in video podcasts and social media campaign production for small businesses, civic groups, and faith-based organizations. The Baltimore native and Syracuse alumna is the editor-at-large for Black Women Unmuted. You may have also seen and heard of Nicki's multimedia work recently on TV One's News One Now, Fatal Attraction, Justice by Any Means, and Thou Shalt Not. She recently served 3 years as the social media director for the Crisis magazine, the official publication for the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People. She was also digital editor for the Philadelphia Tribune's phillytrib.com website and various social media accounts. Nicki worked 3 years as the national correspondent covering breaking news for the Associated Press Radio Network and the AP's Race and Ethnicity team. She was also a producer for TV One's News One Now, a host for national public radio station WAMU FM 88.5 in Washington, D.C., and anchor for 1430 WNAV Radio News in Annapolis. Nicki reported and produced videos for the American Heart and Stroke Association and taught journalism and speech at Cheverly STEM Education Center. Nicki was on the flagship team for EW Scripps The List, helping launch the national entertainment news program in 2012 as the Baltimore correspondent based at WMAR TV ABC2. Before this, Nicki covered and edited stories for AOL as the local editor for Crofton Patch, covering Crofton and Gambrills, Maryland. In 2009, Nicki helped launch YNN Buffalo, a 24-hour Time Warner cable news station. She was a general assignment reporter covering Western New York and New York State politics, including the 2010 gubernatorial race. Before Buffalo, Nicki headed to the Appalachian Mountains in the Tri-Cities in 2008, where she covered news and live reports on a multimedia platform as News Channel 11 morning show reporter and TriCities.com content creator. She delivered live shots and news packages for Media General's WJHL TV viewers, the Bristol Herald Courier, and TriCities.com. Wow. Now that's a lot.
That is a lot.
Like, you've done a lot. You've done a lot. I'm so happy that you're here with us tonight. We are honored to have you. I remember Nicki Mayo at Syracuse. About this journal life, what made you want to be a journalist?
I always wanted to be a journalist. It came down to, did I want to be the first Black woman to be on the Supreme Court, or did I want to be a journalist? And when I found out how much law school, and I kept reading up on Thurgood Marshall, I'm like, I'm not sure I'm ready for that lot in life. So journalism just kind of was the Claire Huxtable, I can't be you. I'm going to go over here and be like the reporter instead. Mm-hmm. And I love it. It's being a nosy kid while also being surrounded by so much information makes you want to like figure out, well, how do I learn more? And then when you realize there's a profession behind it, and I was already being, told at school that I was doing great with my storytelling and with my reports and things. So I was like, okay, this seems like a natural fit. So that's how I ended up with it. I mean, I'm blessed I grew up in Baltimore. So I was always surrounded by broadcasters that looked like me. And then when I would pick up the newspaper, I wasn't sure who these people were, but I knew the stories were being told about folks that I knew. So it was a natural growth.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us like what your journey was like from from being that kid to going to college to now having your own news outlet? What was that like? We know the story pretty much by your experience, but could you like put it into words for us?
It was interesting because I grew up in Baltimore City. So the assumption normally was, while I was looking at all these stories, I did notice that the profile of who I am was not always being depicted in a very accurate light. I understand, we have to tell the news and we have to be factual, but it was not accurate, meaning it just seemed there was a sliver of who was telling the stories about people living in West Baltimore. Everybody loves The Wire. I happen to not be a fan. But everyone loves The Wire, and it's like, okay, but I swear that there's other people here outside of the open air drug market and anybody involved in narcotics. So I kind of felt like I wanted to be a part of, can I please put a face to the other, Black people living in so-called urban, all the coded language.
Mhm.
So yeah, I really was more on that tip as I went into undergrad. Obviously, you saw me in undergrad. My advocacy levels started getting higher when I was undergrad, and they're still here, obviously too. But with advocacy for not just fair media coverage, but accurate media coverage, and then just for all things Black people, like I do work for the Black press, and I do most of my clients these days tend to lean to so-called POCs, people of color. Is because I feel like the marginalized voice has really been an issue the entire lifespan. Like at this point, I'm talking to you guys and I'm 41 years old. And, that little video just showed 20 years of my experience. But through the entire duration of my life, seeing what is considered to be the Black experience be exploited and only told through marginalized eyes, I'm just like, this isn't right. And I want to be a part of telling the accurate stories about us. And we're very vast. Kicking it up to where we are now, because let's be straight, 2020 kind of, was a so-called the reckoning, as they say in our business. But at the same token, it's kind of being met with, yeah, we can see the fatigue already and the leanings going right back to the not so great stories that were being told before. There's balance, and then there's just straight up only telling it through your perspective. So if
Mhm.
I had to be in a newsroom all these years and have people like, I'm not the manager, I'm not the director, I'm in the newsroom following orders, and the stories that I'm being told, whether I'm in Appalachia, Buffalo, Sarasota, Philadelphia, or whatever, Baltimore, are, well, go in the hood and talk about narcotics. I'm like, but there's other stories here. There's other people here. I lived this. I went to private school my whole dang life, but I also lived in the hood. So I'm very familiar with the fact that there is a lot of intersectionality, a lot of diversity, and that Black people are not a monolith. I always wanted to be a part of that. And I mean, we didn't go into the first 10 years of my career out of school, but just know that, I came right back out into BET. Like I was not playing when I said that I wanted to be an advocate as well as be a purveyor of accurate images of Black people
Mhm.
nationwide. So I'm a big advocate for the whole Pan-African diaspora and how we depict these people. And if the audience can definitely relate to the coverage we saw of the Haitian migrants at Del Rio about maybe a week and a half ago, so maybe about 2 weeks ago at this point. And the fact that it's not just the coverage, but also the how they were being treated. It's not just how you covered them, but this was actually happening. Like the fact that we had cameras there is the only reason this is happening. Black Lives Matter is the same thing. Like, oh my God, George Floyd, that video is so horrible. I worked at the Associated Press for 3 years, and the entire time was peak Black Lives Matter time. And I'm looking at these images backwards and forwards, and just like I'm like my therapist got a lot of money those years. But knowing that these are just the ones you got on camera, these stories are seldom told because you're only getting told it through the eyes of typically law enforcement. And if the reporters are not going to scratch and ask those questions about like, well, what really happened? Why did why did you fire this person? Like the deep dive that has to happen seldom happens because we have deadline crunches and stuff. So I wanted to always be a part of humanizing stories that happen to be about people from the Pan-African diaspora.
It's interesting because you started to talk a bit about like what a journalist has to go through, like going deeper than the surface and
Mhm.
deadlines. What is like a day in the life of a journalist?
Sure.
How does that work?
Yeah. Well, you're expected to come to your assignment meetings, whether you're day side or night side. I'm going for the local reporter, not the national. So, because I feel like people can kind of more tangibly look at like WSA 9 and News Channel 8, like the local station. So a local reporter is, you're going to your assignment meeting with at least 3 stories that you're ready to kick out the box. And it cannot be stories that, okay, I got a press release here. It's like the press release is great because somebody already wrote this all up. But what's the story that we're going to run with? Is it just what's happening in the press release, or are there more? How can we, depending on what station you're at, every station I've been at, they've always advocated for, why do I care? Or, put a face to this story. So it's one thing to talk about redistricting and possibly losing delegates in the Maryland State House, going from 3 to 1 and having only one person represent that area. But it's another thing, like, well, what happens when you lose those 2 delegates? Like, what does that mean? That was always your job. Once you get the green light from the meeting, like, all right, we want you to do that story, then it's okay, making phone calls. So that's why you want to pitch stuff that you think you can possibly turn around within 4 hours, because you may not have the full, people say it's 8-hour shift. Yeah, but you probably got about 4 hours to get the story done, because you have to go out there, interview people, grab the video. In the time of COVID, a lot of this is very difficult now. You might have to, the easier version is do a Zoom, yay. But if you have to go and engage people, go out there, you're not guaranteed a lot of interviews. And these are the things you need to tell the story of the day. And you're doing it on what tends to be a good 4-hour turnaround, maybe 5. You got to stop and eat eventually or something like that. I was always a one-man band, a MMJ, a backpack. I'm giving you all the phrases they give you for a journalist that had to carry all of my gear and shoot it all. I'm convinced one of my arms is bigger than the other one for that whole career. But yeah, like, think about it. You're carrying about maybe 20-ish pounds of gear. It's not really that heavy anymore because they're very light. You're running, you're gunning, you're driving to stuff, you're thinking about your story en route back to where you're going to file your story. In the time of COVID, people are filing from home. So that really does help, by the way, because you're probably not driving straight into traffic. But if you are, then you're like, that's why I said 4 hours. You're plugging in time to get lost in traffic. Putting your story together. If you have a video editor, if you have a videographer / editor, great, because you can write your story and they were out there with you and they're slicing up the video to kind of make it go on to your story. But if it's just you, then I spent a lot of my driving back time mentally writing my story at the same time. So that's probably not the best for being attentive, but I swear that's how it was always rolling. Then I'll get back to the station, and in my mind or on my phone, most of this story was already written. Then it's like, okay, let me go and get my script vetted by my manager. And from there, once they say yes, then now I gotta go and edit all of this together. And it's similar to like what y'all just watched with that video of like me doing all this stuff. Like, okay, I had to compile my story, like an outline, old-fashioned outline, put it together, and now I'm gonna go and sit down at a video editing a booth and cut this sucker and be ready to present it, to front it. Now I say 4 hours because the way my shifts used to go is I was often like the morning live shot reporter doing like whatever's happening in town. Then they would send me out on like, okay, now go out and get this story, and then that'd be your story. So I'm turning 2 stories. So it was really about 4 hours for both of those stories. And somewhere in there I found food. That's the grind. Be ready for whatever your live hits were. For that particular position, I was live in the morning and I was live at noon. If I was dayside, it'll probably be these are big, chunky, robust stories that are going to sell it, and have that ready for the 5, 5:30, 6, 10, and 11. But with the 5, 5:30, 6, you're live. With the 10 and 11, you have to do something that will give a live presence. So that means like live from the newsroom, but still pitching to the same story. And yeah, that's the gist of it.
Well, I really never realized that, because it just seems like news anchors that on the news for an hour or two, but you never really think about what they do in the background and how they prepare. And I'm always thinking that there's this big team of people to help you, but
not anymore. They have been depreciating, and that's part of my advocacy as president of the Baltimore Association of Black Journalists, is that the reality of the workforce right now has changed a lot. And I'm always shocked whenever I meet anyone who is remotely on a hosting chair, a anchor chair, and they're like, I don't write. Like, that's unheard of. If you don't write now, you must have written before, because there's no way you're getting to this chair without having to write your own content. And no, Shout out to those. I'm not a big fan of Sinclair Broadcasting, but for those reporters that work at like News Channel 8, they have a lot of regional reporters that they are doing exactly what I just told you. They are taking the cameras out, they are backpacking it. They might even have like live shots don't really even require a truck anymore. They are wearing backpacks to do live shots with like a lot of, it's like a hotspot. So we have really scaled down a lot, but the workload has been, I would say, tripled on people. When I came out of school in 2001, I was trained to be I wasn't even in Newhouse and I was already trained. I was being trained to be a backpacker. I was like, everything they were learning, they told me to do, but I was like, that's how we're going to do this. And they were like, know that you're going to come out being a so-called backpack journalist. So I knew coming out to school that I had to be able to shoot, edit, obviously write my own stories and do all that on top of, put a face on, make sure your hair looks good, all that stuff. I mean, if you looked at that video, any of the movement you saw at the very first part with the buffalo stuff, that's me out there by myself. I am moving to make you think this camera is moving. I don't have a videographer. That is all me with the sticks locked down.
Wow. So that seems like it would be the worst part of the job, maybe. So what's the best part of the job?
Every day's an adventure. I used to run a blog that I stopped. It was called Everyday. What was it? Like extraordinary people, ordinary people's extraordinary stories, something to that effect. It was such a long time ago, and I was just like dropping all my stories in there. So the idea is that on any given day, Joe Blow down the block is going to have a crazy day, and he's going to just tell us all about it, or it might be the worst day of their life, depending on what the heck's happening. But yeah, it's an adventure every day. I'm never bored. Even as I try to like pull away from the newsrooms, they keep pulling me back in. And I still have adventures over and over again. I get to talk to amazing people. One of my best interviews recently was talking to 5 of the women who walked out of the Texas state legislature to protest the voting changes, the attempts at voting changes down in Texas. And the fact that normally your state lawmakers, I don't know, I'm assuming everybody's like Montgomery County-ish, so Maryland State House people, they are hilarious when you talk to them. They really are, like just regular Joes. But at the same token, these are the politicians you elected to represent you. So talking to these women about why'd you leave Texas to come all the way up here to DC? How'd that rock out? And they were very candid about the voter suppression issues that were happening down there and the attempts to disenfranchise entire communities, and voter intimidation is real. And hearing it straight from them, not everybody has access to these people. And as a journalist, that is one thing that you kind of get, you like a front row seat to talk to the newsmakers, to get a straight answer, versus the Facebook debates people want to have, like, well, I heard, or I have a friend that, like, no, I talked straight to the person that made the legislation, or I talked straight to the to Dr. Kinsey and the guys over there at NIH or Johns Hopkins. You get to talk directly to the source, and now you are the purveyor of the information. So you're being entrusted to, without a slant, just give the information.
Well, okay. So that's definitely a benefit like that. That must be, because I know when I interview people, you just learn so much about them. You get to steer the conversation. So what would be a highlight of your career? What is the highlight? Like, what was that moment when you said, this is what I went through the backpacking, this is what I did all of this stuff for?
I don't know. I keep having too many. Every time I have another one, like another thing happens. So it's a good problem to have. I've had a lot of great experiences. I've met like a lot of the entertainers that people love, because there was a period in there where I did arts and entertainment, as you saw, right? So I love theater. So being able to do all the fun stuff at the theaters that I grew up going to, that was dope. I love that. That was so much fun. That was a perk of the job. Chasing people down and on Capitol Hill, to the point where my feet really, the marble in Capitol Hill hurts. I don't care what anybody says, it hurts. It's hard to be carrying stuff around and then chasing these people down. They know you have to run after them. But the fact that, I'm talking to, these lawmakers, these like federal lawmakers, and I'm in my right mind, I'm in my right to do this. This is my profession. That was like, wow, that's real. Because I've been covering politics since around 98. when I was in undergrad working at WAER, and to go from Chuck Schumer running for Senate in New York that long ago to where we are now, it's like, whew, wow.
Yeah.
Like you start having this, like, I'm really doing this for real. Like, yeah.
That's awesome. Those
Mm-hmm.
realizations when you realize that all your hard work is actually paying off and you're doing something that you really love to do. That's awesome. So
Yeah.
how did Nicki Mayo News, you work for so many outlets, you work,
Mm-hmm.
you had multiple jobs, and you're still doing multiple things. How did Nicki Mayo News come about, and how do you find the time to do it?
Okay, so I had an adulting moment where I was like, okay, as much as I love chasing all these stories for all these different news organizations, and keep in mind when you read the bio, I have stood up like 3 different news organizations already in my life. And that's a lot. That's not normal. So I've had the experience of top to bottom, let's say, and let's make this. I've made so many news organizations for everybody else. I finally realized, like, you have the tools to create whatever you want at this point. You are officially a super producer. You know how to be the anchor, how to be the producer, how to staff and manage and stuff like that. So I started leaning more managerial. In my adulting, I started leading more to how can I be more in control of what I work on, because the industry is changing. I can romanticize all the great adventures I get to go on daily, but the fact that I came out of school and you got me being a reporter and the videographer, and now it's like, okay, you're doing that to people and you're paying them worse. Like, it's like I'm just having a hard time seeing this being my adulthood. So I was like, unless I become married to a neurosurgeon or somebody who's gonna make me a kept woman, this had to change. And the change came from me saying, hey, I want to be more in control of the I want to be more in control of the narrative of the stories that I'm doing. Meaning, like, I want to determine what projects am I working on. I don't want to beg anybody anymore to see the humanity in a Black body laying in the street with a white cloth on top of it. I prefer not to focus just on pain and death and the DID of journalism, death, injury, and destruction. I wanted more control over what do I work on. And that's where Nicki Mayo News really started to come out. Because I mean, I've had an LLC for about 6 or 7 years now. But it wasn't until the last 3 years that I really started to ramp things up and figure out, like, well, how can I do that? And the type of clients that I've been able to have, think about it. If I'm a person who knows how to shoot, I know how to edit, I know how to do After Effects and give you all the flash and dash, all that fun stuff you just saw up there. People want that. Video is king right now on social media. So I can get paid very well, as long as it's not somebody that I cover, to make a video for them, to guide them through how to make a podcast. Like, the stuff you're saying you're having classes on, people are coming to me and say, okay, well, can you set us up for a podcast? Can you put this together? And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, for sure. I can totally do that. And now let me start putting a price tag on this sucker. As long as they're not politicians, I can totally do that because I cover politics. But yeah, finding that everything from being a strong writer to being a videographer, a still photographer, an editor, all of these skills are things that people want. There are production houses all around the DC metropolitan area that they charge high prices and stuff. People get paid very well to do this stuff. So I was sitting here like, how can I have more of a balance in my adult life where I can have fun and tell new stories? Because I'm not bored ever. I'm always working on something. Tell stories, but not be chasing fires and having like the smell of somebody's burnt house stuck in my nose for days. And that's how I arrived here. Social media, I've had several opportunities to be the social media lead on a team, whether I was the editor or a content coordinator. And that is a very marketable skill right now. So I have people who are just like, I want to have a campaign going, and they'll tell me what they want. And, like, big plug for Yolanda coming in here. She can do this laps around me. I kind of like watch her and whatever she's doing. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. I steal that idea. So it's real. Like, these are skills that I think journalists kind of shortchange themselves many times. And that's why I've coined the whole hashtag journal life, because yes, my storytelling is rooted in my journalism. However, the different skills that I needed to be that one person news entity, I'm finally using it for myself.
That's awesome.
Thank
so
you.
so you're still covering politics? Do you work for, are you freelancing, working for?
No, I'm building again. because I always build news organizations. So my latest venture, and it's a slow build because both of us have other jobs and stuff to do. Black Women Unmuted. It is a website that is dedicated to Black women in politics and entrepreneurship. So that's the website that I interviewed, like the Texas State Legislature women from.
Mhm.
And whenever, like, we're looking at all the mayoral races, like, November is about to be very busy, but what's really about to be wild is 2022. And I'm working with one of my colleagues from the Associated Press, Sonia Ross. She is the editor-in-chief. I'm an editor at large. And we have freelancers as well, like nationwide, that help us out with this. So it's a slower launch than normal, because normally for my launches, this is all I'm doing. So you can like really, I got it down to a science. We can get this up and running like three months. But if you're doing this on the side while you have other stuff that you're doing, it's going to take a little bit longer. But our goal is to make sure that when these key races that involve either Black women as the politicians, or like we saw in 2018, sometimes it is a big groundswell of Black women in organizations like sororities and civic groups that really can influence and move the needle on races, like what we saw in Alabama. So that's the type of stuff that I cover, and it's easier for me to do that now because I cover like everything from City Hall, County Council to Capitol Hill. Like I can spit this stuff out if I have to, and it's like it's a natural progression for me to finally say, I want to be part of building this versus let me keep asking permission to cover this aspect of politics.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm going to switch gears. That was totally so inspirational and interesting.
Oh, cool.
MCM, we educate our community on media production. What are some of the most important considerations you make when producing news content?
Okay, source. I'm always like, okay, where are we getting this from? Who are we talking to? Importance to the audience. I should reverse that. Importance to the audience is number one, because just because it's important to me does not mean that it's overall important to the audience that we say that we serve. So we have to always take the audience into consideration. Then, of course, the sources. Who are we going to talk to? That leads to the final, which is the why do I care? You should always be able to answer that as you're pitching your stories. It's like, okay, why do I care? Why would the person watching at 5 o'clock want to tune in? We are competing with so many different screens. I got a cell phone and a tablet sitting here, and I'm on a laptop. We're competing with all that for the eyeball. So you gotta sell it. It's gotta be compelling, or it's a waste of time. Many times we get in our heads and we're like, oh, I'm gonna do something artsy fartsy. Like that's cute, but when it comes to ratings and newsworthiness, that ain't always the case. We can't always do a CBS News, the Sunday morning show. Can't always do those packages, okay? So you have to legitimize, why is this newsworthy?
Okay. What's some advice that you can give to someone who wants to be entrepreneurial with their media? And what are some of the things you need to be aware of when starting your media business?
Okay, so I'm running into this a lot because I mentor and I work a lot with like some of the local colleges. So I work with like Morgan State and with Bowie and with Maryland College Park sometimes too. And I do run into students that, they're seeing you ever see that tip of the iceberg meme where they like the iceberg is the only part that everybody sees, the top part, and they don't see like the monstrosity at the bottom. Yeah. So everybody wants to do the fun part that shows up at the top. So everybody wants to do, I do murder, death, kill shows. How do I get to do that? And I'm like, I need you to cover like somebody's crime beat. Like, you got to cover some of the stories. All of that is like the end. That's the marathon moment, the end victory lapping part. I need foundational journalistic skills to be as important as the glitz and the glam part that they're seeing. For every Pulitzer Prize winning writer, there was somebody who was a copy editor at one point that was, covering the local town. Like, I'm really nervous about so many people skipping steps in the name of, oh, well, let's be straight. They're skipping steps, and it's not because they're super talented. It's because these news organizations are being cheap and hiring cheaper and greener. And I can respect that, but then it's like, real talk, you're gonna lose some things because they're not having the foundational skills. Like, you can't have people out here covering the R. Kelly trial and they never cover anybody's court system ever in life. While it's sexy, ooh, R. Kelly trial, like, but they don't even know, like, going into court. You got people going into court wanting to like, take mobile devices and not realizing that sometimes they take your stuff away. I need those things to be part of your life. If you say you want to cover the White House, I need you to have at least been in somebody's city hall, county council, state house at some point in time. And if you want to cover entertainment, which I run into a lot, everybody wants to do entertainment and sports. They ain't even sat at a Friday night football game. And I'm like, that don't make any sense. Or you haven't covered your local theater or whatever. And like, that doesn't make any sense either. So I need foundational skills to be there. I need you to understand what a beat call list is. I need you to understand that really primary, the who, what, when, where, why, just be able to answer those before you proceed with any story. Because I've been very heartbroken as a person who I am very stingy with who I mentor as a result of this, because I have people who, we all have cell phones, so we're all videographers all of a sudden, which I get in the land of TikTok and everything. But when I'm asking you, okay, so why did you write your script that way? And you tell me you didn't write a script. I'm like, so make this make sense. Like, you're coming to me, showing me a whole reel and you didn't write a script. How did this happen? Like, how did this happen? I get very frustrated with that. And I am a very patient teacher-ish person, but for those who want to keep skating past foundational skills, I tune out. I can't help that. If you don't see the importance in writing the basic outline of scripts, of answering the who, what, when, where, why, and how, I can't work with you.
Okay, that's fair. That's
Yeah.
very fair. You've worked with a lot of famous news reporters, Tavis Smiley, Ed Gordon, Jackie Reed, Cheryl Martin. They weren't all on the same show. It was different shows, right?
It was different shows, yeah.
And so
sometimes,
which one do you think was your favorite and why?
That's a good one. Let me think. I'm gonna say Jackie. Yeah, Jackie Reed. She was pretty cool. She had come straight from CNN around that time because it was like the top of 2000s. And I just found her to be a very consummate professional. She wasn't kind of creepy, guyish. Keep in mind, I was working in that shop when I was like fresh out of college, so sometimes it got weird with some of the people. So yeah, I wasn't. And we've all seen Tab has been involved in a lot of mess, so that part too. Yeah, I just really could look up to her. Cheryl Martin's was great. She really was a consummate professional. She talked like this all the time. She was really great to watch. And I think it's just because her show, which was like a Meet the Press kind of feel to it, lead story, is like, okay, it's cool, but it's like, I love her, but it's like your show's kind of like, it's a yawn fest because it's a regurgitation of like, what did we talk about this week? So we had great Black journalists on there talking about their beats and everything. But with Jackie, we were like, again, creating another show. We were she was anchoring the news, and I loved seeing it all come together. Another one that doesn't get a lot of play, but I love her to the moon and back, was Annette Gibbs. And she was like the correspondent for BT News. And she was like, always had that cool package at the top of the show. And we had the luxury of, we could pull any type of music from the tape library to go alongside the stories that we were trying to tell. And the whole time I was at BET as an intern first in 2000, and then finally after graduation in 2001, Annette was our go-to person. So I loved it because I was able to help her with her packages, and then in turn learn how to put together packages. And it was a non-union shop, so I could touch stuff, and I could put my own dang packages together. So she was my fave, but she's not as famous as the rest of them are. She now works for like Walt Disney or something.
Okay, I miss BT News.
It was pretty dope. I still have my mug downstairs from BT News and Public Affairs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You serve as the president of Baltimore Association of Black Journalists, and you were deputy director of National Association of Black Journalists. How important is it for media makers to join organizations like this?
Very crucial. It's easy for news organizations to get away with saying that they're champions of diversity and tout out, they'll trot out their so-called here's our diversity hires. I mean, like, that's how they make you feel when they only come to you and say, here's our Black person that we hired, versus if you had a culture of openness, a culture of inclusivity, then you wouldn't have to go and get the one or the two or the handful of Black people that you have and trot them out every 5 seconds. So I don't think news organizations understand that they have a lot of cleanup to do. And it's news organizations, I'm sorry, it's professional organizations like NABJ, NAHJ for Hispanics, AAJ for Asians, and there's so many more. I'm sorry, I'm gonna like leave them out. There's even one for LGBTQIA. So these are the groups that are holding news organizations accountable and saying that we want to work with you to improve what you're doing here. But yeah, what you're doing here is subpar. And for those who think, I'm doing okay, like there was a whole era, I want to say in the early 2000s, where it was like hire, a Black person, but they would be like first generation American, and then have them report on so-called like Black issues and stuff. And the disconnect there is something that I was like, why don't you guys see that there's a problem here? Like there's a Pan-African diaspora. Not all Black people are the same. And you literally are hiring a first generation American to cover what happened in the 80s in somebody's urban area, right? They don't have a connection to that. And on one hand, like, oh, they're going in clean without any bias. But if they're oblivious, then where are they going to get the information from? So I feel like the professional organizations really do hold a lot of news organizations accountable. When there is an opportunity to have a teachable moment, if you didn't have these big juggernaut groups, then those teachable moments would not happen. It would be like, oh, well, we know. You'll get the brush off and the microaggressions, and then you'll never want to speak up because you don't want to be labeled as the race person or the race baiter.
Okay, I'm gonna get to the question that everybody probably asked you. How did you get to be on those investigation shows, and which ones were they, and how did you prepare for them?
Okay, covered a lot of crime. Covered a lot of horrible stories, y'all. I can only laugh about them now, but I mean, you got to keep in mind, I have been doing this like out in the field, running and gunning, literally with a camera by myself. Oh, wow. I started reporting on air over here at CTV 76. That was my very first reporter job. And which I guess is similar to you all, but not the same, obviously. And that was like 2005, 2006-ish, I feel. Yeah, with my infographic, about 2005, 2006-ish. So I have been covering a lot of regular general assignment, and sadly, in a market like Prince George's kind of falls into the DC market, but in the Baltimore and DC and Sarasota and Buffalo and also in Appalachia, that's a lot of horrible stories. They're not always going to be politics. I used to beg for politics stories because I really covered crime and cops a lot. And I have been at a lot of shootouts and standoffs and everything. So that was the first part is, real talk. Do you have the merit badge of you cover crime? And I've covered a lot. And the reality of the stories you see on the news nightly, on local news, police are on the scene of a double shooting. They're looking for somebody. A woman is dead, blah, 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 blah. That's normally all you get. With these crime investigation shows, they're asking us like, okay, can you remember that one case? Yeah, can you go back to that case? We want to talk about that case. And you're like, all right, what about it? And they're like, we want to paint the picture of, well, who put a story together? Like, who was this person? What led to the deadly moment? I do Fatal Attraction, Justice by Any Means, For My Man. And there's another show that's coming out for Oxygen that I'm doing as well. So we're putting a real story to these horrible homicides that, believe it or not, like you heard on I did that on purpose for conversation, but on the audio clip from WHUR radio, when we were talking about the missing white woman syndrome, that when someone goes missing, when a woman goes missing in particular, we know to first look at the love interest. You got to figure out who would want this woman gone. So that's how I kind of got like roped into it. Believe it or not, the producers for the show found me on LinkedIn, and they were like, did you cover crime in Buffalo? Did you cover crime in DC or in Prince George's and Baltimore? I'm like, believe it or not, I think I got blessed. The only place that I did not have to cover crime is my hometown. Oh, cool. God gave me a break. Like I got a break for once. Yeah. I got to cover like all the fun arts and entertainment stuff, but heck, even in Crofton, and let's be straight, Crofton, Gambrills, okay, Crofton, no crime. Gambrills, crime. Like, like in Anne Arundel County, you can find pockets where it's like, that's some dicey area right there. I know my state. Sadly, I know the type of crimes that happen in certain areas. No areas a monolith at all, but some of them, when you hear it, you're like, yeah, that sounds like a high level, a lot of money involved, and you're like, okay, sounds like Howard County. So you start thinking like, where do these things happen? I cover Baltimore cases, DC cases, greater DMV cases. That's what they tap me for. I don't have a favorite. If anything, that the cliffhanger clip that I left you with was the one that was like my very first one that I did. So I came out I was like, I get a chance to actually, tell who these people are. Oh, we're gonna have we're gonna have fun with this today, because it's wild. These stories are very wild, and we have these you have these cocktail party stories where you're like, let me tell you this crazy story that I was covering the other day. All right, this is what really happened, because we know we reported in like a minute 15 on the air, but let me tell you what really happened, like what the family told me was. And it feels a little guy at the end of the bar, or sipping wine and talking, but that's how this stuff really happens. People don't just say, I don't like my girlfriend, I shot her. There's some buildup there. There's some reason. There's some Lifetime movie happening in real life. That's what I am really getting paid to do, is tell what really happened.
Well, I wanted to hear that. But I was like, how does she know all of this? Because you covered the stories. Okay.
Either I covered it or I had to go back and research it. It depends on which story I've done. I tried to sit there and chronicle all of my stories, just because I was like, I'm behind in that. And as I start logging them, like, the ratio is like a half and half type of thing.
Okay. So this is my final question, and then we'll open it up for any audience members. What is your advice to anyone watching who might want to get into journalism?
For anyone watching, make sure it's not something you want to do maybe as just a hobby, because it's okay to be a hobbyist and dabble in journalism. But if you want to make the full-time commitment to it, then make sure that you are of a certain age that financially you can afford to not be so well off, because the way they're paying these days, I don't advise anybody leaving a stable career to go into journalism. As much as we need good people, if they're not going to compensate you for those student loans you got to pay back, then I'm not going to tell you, yeah, definitely leave that banking job and go do journalism. It's just not a smart move. We do need more journalists, and we do need those that are committed to truth and the whole spreading light, like shining light on the truth. We need those. We don't really need more entertainment and more sports reporters. We have a lot, like it's like Atlanta, like we full, we good. Plus most of the ones that keep it is just like, plus the people who are like attracted to it, just they're not attracted to, I want to like give you a full story. They're attracted to the fandom and the fangirling of it all. So it's like, you're not really giving us a story. You're taking advantage of the press pass and the front seat to history as it's happening in the entertainment sphere and then the sports sphere. But we do need people committed to investigations. That's the tough one, is getting people who can stick in it for that. Social media is popping, but what I'm noticing is the hiring trends for social media is like, oh, we just need somebody who knows how to put stuff online. And the foundational stuff is kind of getting lost there, because not everybody is getting a chance to just write stories yet. Even if you're writing briefs, I just need to know that you can write, because if you went in on the social media track and you never learn how to write, or you never get an opportunity to, that's scary for me. We don't need folks like, I know citizen journalism is a big thing. We don't need to be inundated with a bunch of folks who are playing journalists. We really do need working journalists that have the same fundamentals, have some checks and balances here, that have some, if you publish something that's incorrect, you're going to get sued. I need that to be part of your life, not, oh, I'm just playing here. So as much as I love YouTube and love watching like bloggers, I know that this is not my news source. This is where I get leads, if anything like that. And I need people to understand there's a difference between going to a reputable news source, taking their information and then saying it like, oh yeah, I'm reporting them. Like, you didn't report nothing. You're reading what somebody else did. Like, you need to attribute where you got that from. And the fact that attribution is not a part of their lexicon, then yeah, no. Admire what we do, but if you're not ready to commit to as close to unbiased as possible, because we can't really be without bias, but as close to unbiased as possible and responsible journalism, don't do it. Just admire it.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. I hope that you will join us again for Pro Talks. The next one is in November, and that's going to be Skylar Henry, the CBS News correspondent. Nicki, thank you so much for joining us. Oh my gosh, this was awesome. You have so much wisdom. We're so grateful to have learned your story and learned just a little bit about your journey. All the best to you. I'll be in touch.
Thank you very much.
All right, everybody, have a good night. Bye.